Hi, great to be here. I'm the last person. I feel some sort of weight upon my shoulders to both finish on time, but to somehow deliver something here. This charter has a lofty name. Stephen Kipper, he said, am I now working for the UN? No. But I'll take you through this fairly quickly. And let me just work out the clicker. I should have looked at this earlier. Yes. I'll move through this fairly quickly. There's more to it than I'll show you, but this is the start of a conversation, and I feel a little bit presumptuous, a little bit impetuous almost, doing this and talking it through with a number of people. I thought, well, if not me, who will do it? I'll start a process, and I'll be, I don't know, contentious or obvious, I'm not sure. What is a charter? I'll take you through these main elements of the charter and then invite feedback. So the origins of this are a DFAT-funded project I have with colleagues in Chile, and the essence of it is to exchange information between South America and Australia. It's a small project. It is hopefully the start of something bigger. Chile does a good bushfire. And they're hungry for information, for help, for examples, and I mean, I guess we do learn from them as well, but you know, I think in many ways it's to try and help and facilitate and get the conversation going. So there's a website there, and I'll give you a QR code at the end. You can have a look at that website. So what is a charter? I felt a bit worried, it sounds a bit grand, but the reason I went down this path is that I had this realisation that the edge, these interface areas, well, who's really looking after them as a whole? And I suspect the reason I was put to the end is not so that fewer people would be exposed to my tenured professor madness, but just that we're sort of going back up to 10,000 feet here a little bit and just looking down at the overall sediment. So in many ways, the idea here is to say, well, who is caring for all of the constituent elements of a fire-adapted settlement? Who joins all the bits up? How do we know what it is? So, you know, there's a UN Charter for the Rights of Humans. That's big stuff, back from 1947. And a number of other charters out there, but the one that really inspired me is the Burra Charter, which was developed in Burra in South Australia in 1974. And it was the beginning in Australia, and indeed a global movement, of saying, how do we recognise heritage places? It was a big deal because all this stuff was going on. They didn't regularise it. They didn't sort of start really thinking on and grinding through all the challenges of how to deal with it. Now we've got a very mature way of thinking overall about this and what counts and what doesn't and processes to use, etc. And, you know, I'm from a design background, and I guess that has sort of been part of the backdrop to a lot of the work I've done. So I thought, well, maybe we need something that sort of looks like that. Obviously, you know, it's not completely analogous. So why would you have a charter in this sense? Just imagine describing a fire-adapted settlement to a newcomer. A politician, a student, a researcher trying to think through a project, someone from South America or Greece or, you know, all of these places with more and more wildfire risk, including ourselves. And it also occurred to me, for all our issues, we're pretty good. Are we the world leaders in this area? I'm not sure, but maybe we are. And there's a lot of different knowledge coming. So here I am, again, the university professor, sort of scraping off all of the collective wisdom. So that's why I feel a little bit reluctant about this, but maybe that's my job as well, to just come out and have a go at something. You know, maybe this is the start of providing some metrics for things that cut across different disciplinary groups. Maybe just understanding the place of a fire-adapted settlement, or one that is not yet fire-adapted, which is probably, you know, it allows us to put a critical lens across our systems. So you may or may not want to go to another link, because I know you've been invited to do that a fair bit. This is the document. I expect it's going to change, but if you want to look at the fuller version, I'm going to have some very summarised things I'm going to show you. I've really got just 4 more slides. And the idea is that we get it out there and we start working on it and, acknowledge that there will be problems and, things have already been said and, well, we've got it wrong or whatever. And so I'm not going to talk to all of these, and I'll explain that very quickly. I'll hasten to explain that the longer version sets these out in more detail. But to give you a flavour of what we're talking about, those first 4 are probably not a bad set to start thinking through. And just that first statement, which is my paraphrase of a longer paragraph, wildfires, and I'm using international language here, of course, not bushfire, wildfires will occur in flammable landscapes. Pardon for the typo, missing full stop. Now, seems rather obvious, maybe to us, but as we know, lay people will come and they'll get a hold of all kinds of things and they won't just start with that fundamental beginning point of how to start imagining the inevitability of a fire in a place. And just to get that out there and to start working on that. And then, okay, intentional assessment of risk is undertaken in the place. It's got to be specific to the place. It's got to be intentional. It needs to be methodical. And then we go to the next one. Risks are broken down. Okay, are some risks pretty much fixed? There's a landscape that can't really be modified, particularly further out from a settlement. The topography is just there. There's things about climate and weather. But are there variables? Well, let's identify those variables that we might be able to change or that will vary day on day, season on season, year on year, etc. Short, medium, and long, I won't go into the details of that. But then, okay, who's the risk assessment for and who's it by? I was very struck at the AFAC conference. I'm sure some of you were there a couple of weeks ago. Dr. Jen Beverley from the Canadian Fire Service was talking about how they were doing all these big probabilistic studies of risk in their wider landscapes. And then the realisation came a few years ago that they're kind of meaningless because you have to flip it and do the risk assessment from an individual settlement to really, help to understand what happens in places. And so I'm thinking, haven't you always been doing that? But that kind of brought home to me that there's this real unevenness across different communities in Australia and internationally about these understandings, hence to try and get this out there. So there's plenty more there, and what I haven't done here is started saying, okay, here are perhaps some universal processes, but that might be another thing to do of working out risks for different groups, for different purposes. Near ag probably won't be much to do with it, but it might have something to do with it, and making it user-friendly. And then, again, I won't go through all of these because I know you can read far quicker than I can talk. But acknowledging that a settlement does a whole bunch of things, as well as be a place where fires occur and we try and look after people in all the different roles that we play, whether it's response or planning or architecture design, certification, etc. And that we need to actively put all that together. And then wildfire risk is actively and comprehensively managed. And again, breaking that down to the elements, dealing with exposure, fuel loads, if they can be modified, resistant structures, work on siting, work on all the other features that might have something to do with it, electricity systems and so forth. Some of this has really been inspired by work I did, and indeed others, in South America, working in informal settlements and trying to retrofit things in there and trying to deal with some of their slightly mad bureaucratic systems of trying to fit this together as well. Prioritising existing settlements, looking at urban morphology systems. I think in Australia we really do have a tendency to home in on the structure, even though, like we had the talk today from Western Australia, they're looking at strategic planning. We still tend to focus in on the structure. Nothing wrong with that, it's just part of a bigger puzzle. So again, here I'm trying to provoke some new directions to get a little bit more sophisticated in these ways. I can see the time evaporating. Okay. Then thinking about these bigger networks and systems, and getting some premises here that, you know, wildfires, bushfires are part of these systems. Sometimes they're modified by humans. But could we start thinking about, well, when they happen, we want not to be overwhelmed with them? Is this an aspiration we could possibly meet? If so, what might it look like? And I know all of you here have had these conversations, whether red wine or beer has been associated with them, of just starting to think about that. But again, to start pulling all this together in a single document. Whole of system approach, again, I don't have to reiterate that. I hope that's kind of obvious, but here's the point of pulling it all together. The final one there, vegetation and other related management, I haven't really written that well, is integrated across jurisdictional, ownership, spatial and other boundaries. Again, we've all got our little stories about how, you know, a line on the map according to who is responsible, say, for vegetation management or different ownership has caused issues. The reason I homed in on that one, it is of particular concern for me in the Chilean context, where they have a planning system that stops at the edge of the built-up area, and then outside there's no potential to modify the structures in the lower density areas. So it's kind of interesting to look at a different system. You think, wow, we kind of got it good here compared to them. And indeed, part of the inspiration for this charter was the Chileans, they wanted a manifesto for change. They do get a bit excited there. And I thought, well, let's call it a charter. So final one, governance. Of course, these systems are based on a series of decisions by people or groups of people with different powers, abilities, knowledge sets. It's all about these decisions, whether or not it's part of a regulatory structure. And to just start saying, okay, let's think about place custodianship as a starting point for that. That would integrate Indigenous understandings, new people with all different links, whether it's an economic link because you've got a business or a place you grew up or a place you visited on holidays, etc. And recognising that governance really, I would say, underlies most of what is good and bad about what we do in managing this place. Comes down to the decisions, doesn't it? I'm not all about regulating everything, but that is part of it. And then the final one, this is sort of my second last slide, but the last detailed one, shared responsibility. And it's kind of interesting, I was yesterday morning at a breakfast meeting with a partnership between Suncorp and the NHRA, and it was about planned retreat. And so there is about to be a draft paper released in a matter of days or weeks. I'm not quite sure how long that will take. And it was very interesting in that conversation, they were kind of skirting around this idea about shared responsibility. And I was just thinking the conversation we just had in the talk just before this was about, you know, who takes responsibility. We can't marketise everything. We need to kind of spread loads and costs according to ability. And this needs to wash through most of our systems. We've got a huge diversity of what people can and can't do. And so maybe we need to just think about those a bit more carefully. So that's a pretty quick, did that work? I've got to point it at something maybe. There we go. That's my final slide. And sorry if I raced a little bit because I'm also hoping to get some feedback. If you click in there, you will see the website. which is called Wildfire X. It's got a Spanish and an English version. Hopefully you get the English one there, but you can just click the language change button if you need to. Send things there, or send things to me at Alan March at Melbourne University. Don't type that in, but you can find me. The university makes it impossible to hide. They put all our details up on the web. And I hope we've got a few minutes for questions, conversations. Be upset if you feel like it, or, this hopefully the start of a productive conversation. And sort of as a starter question to you is, do you think we need to sort of look above here and start to think of more universal processes of how we might achieve some of these higher aspirations? But don't feel that's got to drive your questions or comments to me. So maybe you're stunned with the end of a conference as well. I know I'm a bit tired.
Thanks, Alan. Do you think this ties in a lot with everyone's desire in the bushfire space, I think, to have a more united national system in Australia?
Certainly this challenge we face in Australia about centralisation and federalism and these sorts of questions are very challenging. I think there are many principles. I mean, part of the drive for this is that I think many things are highly universalised or universalisable, as well as recognising it's got to really be about place at the same time, the particularity of a place. I think ever since I've been involved in the built environment, that's my whole working life in some form, there's been this challenge about federal, state, local. And when you look internationally, it's really interesting. They always say, oh, it's got to be locally driven, and they really look to the mayors and local government. But we're just such a different beast. We don't really look after local government at all in this country. The local governments are not even recognised in our constitution. They do most of the work with very little of the money. So I guess centralising some things is always going to be a good idea, but we have that thing of the constitution, I suppose. We've got construction codes, but I think this is much more than a construction code. It's to sort of try and cut across with some cool thinking. I didn't really answer that, did I? Yeah. So I'm looking at my watch because I've got a car waiting for me after this.
I'll make it quick then. Just interesting that your background is in the built environment, and having done the graduate certificate of bushfire planning and management, you were one of my teachers. I had to do that within a Masters of Architecture from a different university, purely because there was no education on bushfire behaviour and how that affects the built environment. And I can just see over this whole conference, there's incredible, studies and information coming out of it, but it's not translating to the professionals that end up designing the buildings. Architects and building designers, landscape architects, probably know more about it, but to me, that feels like the biggest gap.
Okay.
How do we do that transition?
Again, I probably can't answer it, but I will say thank you, because I think you've just given me another principle that I don't think really is in there particularly well. The trouble with, as now an educator, I've gone over to the beige side. I don't do a lot of practice stuff anymore. One of the challenges with running, say, a master's course is you've got accreditation, often from more than one body, and then you've got all the requirements of the university, and many of those are imposed by federal standards of how much time you do things and what counts as a subject or a degree or whatever. And then you're just trying to jam it all in there. And most universities or departments will sort of say, we do more of this or less of that. And unfortunately, I don't think general risk management is sort of not in the equation much. Engineering, you might get a fair bit of it. Financial sector, maybe they get a bit of it in their education. The rest of us, it's a bit lucky whether it ends up in there. But maybe there's another sort of reformist drive that I could get involved in. So thanks. Silence probably means we need to end. I'll get out of the way. Thanks very much.